The Winchester rifle trembled in Jake Thornton's weathered hands. He stared through the grimy cabin window, his knuckles white. Outside, 50 Apache warriors sat on their horses, motionless, painted for war. They had surrounded his small ranch like buzzards circling a dying man. Death itself had come calling, and Jake knew it was here for him. Behind him, a sound, the rustle of a wool blanket. And there she was, the most beautiful woman he'd ever laid eyes on. Ayanna, wife of the man outside, Chief Iron Wolf. Her long black hair was a river of darkness over her bare shoulders, and her eyes, those deep dark eyes, held secrets that were about to get them both killed. One night. That's all it had been. One freak storm, one wounded woman stumbling out of the white hell, seeking shelter. One single moment of weakness. When two broken, lonely souls found a desperate, damning comfort in each other's arms. Now the morning sun cast long, accusing shadows across the Arizona desert. Jake's reckoning had arrived. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, a cold, hard knot of fear. Then a voice cut through the silence like a razor. It was the Apache Chief. "Sergeant Thornton, I know who you are." Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. His heart hammered against his ribs. 45 years of living, 10 years of hiding from his own ghosts, and it was all coming down to this one impossible moment. What choice does a broken man make when he's about to lose the only thing he's cared about in a decade? Just 24 hours earlier, Jake had been nothing more than another forgotten soldier, a ghost himself, trying to drown his demons in a bottle of cheap whiskey. The Battle of Little Bighorn had left scars on him, scars deeper than the old Apache arrowhead still buried in his shoulder. They were scars on his soul, and they ached every time the high desert wind howled through the canyons. His horse ranch was a lonely speck of dust 30 miles from Fort Apache. He'd thought it was far enough from civilization, far enough that the ghosts of dead cavalrymen couldn't find him. He had been wrong. The blizzard struck without any warning. It turned the cold October night into a swirling vortex of white fury. Jake was wrestling with the stable doors, the wind tearing at him, when he saw her, a figure stumbling, falling through the blinding snow. She was clutching her side, and even from a distance, he could see the blood. Dark red seeping between her fingers, a stark stain against the pale, doe-skin dress that clung to her body. "Jesus," he muttered, dropping his hammer. The sound was swallowed by the storm. She collapsed just as he reached her. He caught her, her weight surprisingly light in his arms. And as he held her against his chest, the world seemed to stop. Even wounded, even half frozen and dying, she was breathtaking. High cheekbones, full lips, skin the color of burnished copper in the faint light. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They were intelligent, defiant, and completely, utterly unafraid. She looked right through him, her voice a raw whisper against the screaming wind. "Please," she said, in perfect, unaccented English. "They're coming for me." But her eyes told a different story. They weren't pleading. They were commanding. Jake carried her inside, his own hands trembling as he laid her gently on his narrow bed. The cabin felt small, suddenly charged with a dangerous energy. The bullet wound in her shoulder was clean through. A small price to pay, maybe, for whatever trouble she was in. As he took his knife and carefully cut away the blood-soaked leather of her dress, she watched him. Her gaze was intense, analytical. She never flinched, not once. "You're not what I expected," she said softly, her voice stronger now that she was out of the wind. "What did you expect?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "A monster," she said without hesitation. "That's what they tell the Apache children about the white soldiers. The long knives." Jake's hands froze. He looked up from the wound, meeting her gaze. "You're Apache?" "Half," she corrected, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "My mother was Mexican." She tried to sit up, a sharp wince of pain crossing her face for the first time. "My name is Ayanna. I am the wife of Chief Iron Wolf." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. He'd heard of Iron Wolf. Of course he had. The last of the great war chiefs. The one man still fighting the government, The man who would rather die free in the mountains than watch his people wither away on a reservation. And this was his wife, in Jake's cabin, on Jake's bed, bleeding from a bullet wound. He reached for the whiskey bottle on the table, his hands shaking. "Then you shouldn't be here." "No," she agreed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I shouldn't." But she didn't leave, and Jake didn't ask her to. As he poured whiskey onto a clean rag to sterilize the wound, their eyes met in the flickering lamplight. She was forbidden, a walking, breathing embodiment of every line he couldn't cross. Married. Apache. As dangerous as a loaded gun with the hammer pulled back. Yet when her hand, the one that wasn't clutching her blanket, came up and touched his face, he didn't pull away. Her fingers were gentle, tracing the long, jagged scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw. A ghost from his past. "How did you get this?" she asked. Her touch was fire. "Same place I learned to hate myself," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Little Bighorn," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, surprised she knew. "I was there," she said quietly, her eyes distant. "Iron Wolf's first wife was killed in the fighting that came after. That's when he took me as his wife, to unite our bands against your people." The question left his lips before he could stop it. "Do you love him?" The question hung in the air between them, thick and heavy like smoke from the hearth. Outside, the blizzard screamed, a lonely, violent sound. "I respect him," she said finally, her eyes locking back onto his. "He is a great man, a great leader." She paused, and the cabin fell silent, except for the crackling fire and the howling wind. "But love," she shook her head slowly. "Love is choosing to stay when you have every reason to run." Jake's throat was bone dry. In the warm firelight, with her black hair falling loose around her shoulders and the rough wool blanket slipping low enough to reveal the soft swell of her breasts, she was the most dangerous temptation he had ever faced in his life. He was a man who had stared down death, but he wasn't sure he could stare down this woman. "They'll kill me if they find you here," he said, the words a last, desperate attempt at self-preservation. "Yes," she said, "and you." Her gaze didn't waver. "He will think I ran. He will hunt me. When he finds me, he will give me to the soldiers as a peace offering, a sign of good faith. I'll die in a white man's prison." Then she moved, closer. So close he could smell the faint scent of sage and pine in her hair. So close he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I don't want to die without knowing what it feels like," she whispered, her breath warm against his cheek. "What?" His voice was a choked rasp. "To be chosen," she said, her eyes burning into him. "To be wanted for myself, not for politics or alliances or for the survival of my people. Just for me." And with that, Jake's last wall of resolve crumbled into dust. She kissed him. It was soft and desperate, and tasted of freedom and damnation all at once. Her hands were urgent, pulling at the rough fabric of his shirt, and he was lost, completely and utterly lost. They came together with the fierce desperation of the condemned, two broken souls finding a fleeting, violent solace in the heart of a storm. She moved like wild water beneath him, whispering his name like a prayer, like a curse. And for one perfect, terrible night, Jake Thornton forgot about dead soldiers and broken promises and the ghosts that haunted his every waking moment. He forgot everything but the woman in his arms. When dawn broke, pale and gray through the window, he woke up alone. She was gone. The only traces she'd left behind were the faint scent of sage on his pillow and the memory of her touch, branded onto his skin. That is, until the Apache war party surrounded his cabin. Chief Iron Wolf was everything Jake had expected, and nothing he could have possibly imagined. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver threading through his long black hair. His face was a mask of hardened leather, carved by sun and war. And his eyes had seen too much death. But when he spoke, his voice wasn't filled with rage. It was heavy with the weight of a man forced to make impossible choices. "Step outside, Sergeant. We have business." Jake's body moved on instinct. He checked his weapons. The Winchester, his Colt revolver, the knife tucked in his boot. It was enough to take some of them with him. It wasn't nearly enough to survive. He took a deep breath, opened the cabin door, and stepped out onto the porch into the cold morning air. "I'm not a sergeant anymore," he said, his voice steady. Iron Wolf's smile held no warmth. It was a sharp, dangerous thing. "Once a soldier, always a soldier. I remember you, from Apache Pass, 23 years ago." The memory hit Jake like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs. Apache Pass. The day everything had gone wrong. The day orders had turned into a massacre. The day a young cavalry sergeant had chosen humanity over duty and earned nothing but disgrace and a lifetime of nightmares for his trouble. "You remember that?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A man remembers kindness," Iron Wolf said, swinging down from his horse. His warriors tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons. "Even from his enemy. You were the one who tried to stop your men from shooting the women and the children." He took a step closer. "My wife told me what you did last night." Jake's hand instinctively moved to the butt of his Colt. "She was wounded. I helped her." "Yes." The silence stretched between them, pulled taut like a bowstring. Jake could lie, but he knew those dark, knowing eyes would see right through it. He could fight, but 50 warriors would cut him to pieces before he even cleared leather. "Then I made a choice I'll have to live with," he said finally, meeting the chief's gaze. Iron Wolf studied him for a long, agonizing moment. Then he nodded slowly. "My wife is not in your cabin." It wasn't a question. "No." "Where is she?" "Gone," Jake said. "Left before dawn." "To where?" Jake held his gaze unwavering. "I don't know." And that at least was the truth. Ayana had vanished like smoke in the wind, leaving only a faint set of hoofprints heading south, towards the border, towards Mexico. Iron Wolf stepped closer, so close Jake could see the deep lines of pain etched around his eyes, the profound weariness hidden beneath the warrior's mask. "The army is coming," Iron Wolf said, his voice low, meant for Jake alone. "General Miles, he has orders to capture or kill every Apache not on the reservation. My people are tired. We are hungry. We cannot fight much longer. So surrender." The word tasted bitter. "And watch my children die slowly from government rations and white man's diseases, instead of quickly in battle." Iron Wolf shook his head. "No, there is another way, but it requires trust." "What kind of trust?" "The kind that might get us both killed," the chief admitted. His eyes never left Jake's face, searching for something. "My wife has family in Mexico. If she reaches them safely, my people will know there is a path, a way to survive without surrendering our souls to your government. Others will follow." Jake felt the steel jaws of the trap closing around him. He saw the shape of it now. "You want me to help her escape?" The chief's next words shattered everything Jake thought he understood. "She did not run away, Sergeant. I sent her to you." The world tilted on its axis. Jake stared at the Apache chief, the words echoing in the cold morning air. Sent her? The blizzard, the wound, the desperate plea for help? It was all a lie. "You sent her?" Jake repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "The blizzard was real. The wound was real," Iron Wolf clarified, his expression grim. "But it was not from my warriors. It was from one of your army scouts. They knew she was carrying something important. They tried to stop her. She was supposed to lose them in the storm and find her way here. To you." Jake's mind reeled. The woman he'd held, the woman he'd made love to. She hadn't been a desperate fugitive. She'd been a soldier on a mission, and he was just a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. "Why me?" Jake demanded. "Because of Apache Pass," Iron Wolf said simply. "Because you are the one soldier I have ever met who showed mercy. Because you are a man without a flag. Your army thinks you are a deserter. My people think you are an enemy. You are a ghost, Thornton, the perfect man to guide another ghost through this cursed land." The plan was audacious, insane. Iana wasn't just fleeing, she was a messenger. She carried a secret treaty proposal, one drafted by a council of the last free tribes, offering peace in exchange for autonomous lands in the high mountains, a proposal the U.S. government had already laughed at. "The Americans will not listen," Iron Wolf said, spitting on the ground. But there are others who might. Powerful men in Mexico. Men who would benefit from a stable, friendly nation on their northern border. Ayana was to deliver the proposal to them. And the scout who shot her? He works for a man you know, Iron Wolf said, his eyes hardening. Lieutenant Morrison. Morrison. The name was a punch to the jaw. Jake's former commanding officer, the ambitious, ruthless officer who had given the order to fire at Apache Pass. The man who had branded Jake a deserter and a coward when he'd refused to obey. Morrison had been hunting him for 10 years, a relentless dog on a cold trail. Morrison wants this war to continue, Iron Wolf explained. He grows rich selling guns and supplies. He profits from the death of my people and yours. If this treaty reaches Mexico, his war is over. He will do anything to stop her. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The desperation in Ayana's eyes hadn't been for herself. It had been for her people. The passion in her touch. What was that? A lie to secure his help? Or something real, caught in the crossfire of a secret war? I want you to ensure she reaches the Rio Grande alive, Iron Wolf commanded. You know this country better than any man. You speak enough Apache to pass for a traitor. And, he paused, his gaze sharp, she trusts you now. What's in it for me? Jake asked, the words feeling hollow. When she is safe, I will ride into Fort Apache and surrender myself to General Miles, the chief said. A prize like that might buy some mercy for the families who must remain behind. For you, Morrison's commander will be so pleased to have me in chains, he will wipe your record clean. A victory, not a court-martial, for a deserter. You will be a free man. It was a death sentence wrapped in nobility. Jake had seen enough military mercy to know Iron Wolf would never leave army custody alive. And his freedom, bought with the blood of this proud man. He looked past the chief to the 50 warriors watching him, their faces impassive. They were waiting for his answer. The fate of their people rested on the word of a broken-down ex-soldier they had every reason to kill. How do I know you won't kill me the second she's safe? Jake asked. Iron Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the distant, sun-drenched mountains. Because killing you will not bring back my first wife. It will not erase what your people have done to mine. He looked back at Jake, and for the first time Jake saw not a chief or a warrior, but a man, a husband and a father, bearing an impossible weight. But maybe helping you save this one life can begin to balance the scales. It was suicidal. A week-long ride through hostile desert with a woman who was now a complete stranger to him, a woman carrying a document that could end a war or get them all killed. Dodging cavalry patrols led by his worst enemy and Mexican bandits, all to deliver her to freedom, while her husband marched proudly to his own execution. Jake thought of Ayana's eyes in the firelight. He thought of the way she had whispered his name. He thought of the taste of redemption he had found, however briefly, in her arms. Was it real? Did it even matter now? When do we leave? He asked. Iron Wolf's smile was as sharp and dangerous as a freshly honed blade. She is waiting for you at Skeleton Canyon. You have until sundown to decide if you are the man she believes you to be, or the coward your army has always said you are. With a sharp cry, the war party wheeled their horses and thundered north, leaving Jake utterly alone in a cloud of dust, his heart pounding with the weight of his choice and the memory of a woman who had shown him what it felt like to be worth saving. Skeleton Canyon was aptly named. It was a graveyard, a place of bleached bones and bad memories, where the skeletons of Apache warriors and cavalry troopers lay scattered among the rocks. A place where two worlds had collided, and both had lost. Jake found Ayana there at sunset. She was sitting beside a small, smokeless fire, as if she'd been waiting for him forever. She had changed out of the blood-stained doe skin. Now she wore a simple cotton dress that did little to hide the graceful curves of her body, and her arms were bare. Her hair was braided, woven with small silver ornaments that caught the last rays of the dying sun. And when she looked up at him, her expression was impossible to read. There was no relief, no gratitude, just a calm, steady watchfulness. You came, she said. It was a statement of fact, not a question. Did you think I wouldn't? He asked, swinging down from his horse. He led his own mount and the heavily laden pack mule towards a small trickle of water seeping from the canyon wall. "I hoped you would," she replied. "Hope and certainty are very different things." He stopped and turned to face her. "Your husband told me everything." "I know." There was no apology in her voice. "He is sacrificing himself for the chance that some of our people might survive." She stood then, moving toward him with that same fluid grace that made his chest tighten. "Just like you are sacrificing your safety for a cause you barely understand, for a woman who lied to you." "Maybe I understand more than you think," he said, his voice low. He watched her come closer, saw the golden flecks in her dark eyes, the defiant tilt of her chin. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have believed me?" she countered. "A strange Apache woman stumbles to your door in a blizzard, claiming to be on a secret peace mission? Or would you have thought it was a trap, that I was there to kill you in your sleep?" She stopped just inches from him. "I couldn't take that chance. I had to know what kind of man you were first. I had to see if the man from Apache Pass still existed." He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek. Her skin was warm, soft. "And what did you decide?" She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a fraction of a second. "I decided," she whispered, "that you are the first man I have ever met who chose me over duty." He wanted to believe her. Gods, how he wanted to believe her. But the sting of the deception was still fresh. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his hand dropping away from her face. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing it for your husband. I'm doing this because Morrison is a butcher. And if there's a chance to stop him, I have to take it. This is about balancing the scales." A flicker of hurt crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cool mask of determination. "Then we have an arrangement, you and I. A partnership." "An arrangement," he agreed. They rode through the night, a cold distance between them, following game trails and dry washes that wouldn't hold their tracks. Ayana rode as if she were born in the saddle, silent and tireless, keeping pace without a single word of complaint, even when the rocky trail became treacherous enough to lame a lesser horse. At dawn, they made a cold camp in a hidden arroyo, chewing on dry jerky and stale biscuits. The romance of the stormy night was gone, replaced by the grim reality of their mission. Jake took the first watch while she slept, curled against his saddle like a wildcat, one hand resting on the knife at her belt. Even in sleep, she was beautiful, the kind of dangerous beauty that started wars and toppled kingdoms. He found himself watching her, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the way her braided hair caught the moonlight. He hated himself for it. He hated the pull she still had on him. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly, her voice startling him in the pre-dawn quiet. Her eyes were open, watching him. "Who?" "Your wife, Sarah." The name still felt like a raw wound. "She died of influenza. Our second winter in this God-forsaken country. We were going to have children, build something that would last." He stared into the darkness, the memories flooding back. "After she died, I stopped believing in forever." "What do you believe in now, Jake Thornton?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, at this impossible, complicated woman who had turned his life upside down in a single day. He looked at her, and for the first time he spoke the unvarnished truth. "Right now? This moment," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "And stopping Morrison." On the second day they were spotted, a cavalry patrol, riding hard on the horizon, dust plumes rising like signals in the clear desert air. And at their head, a figure Jake would recognize in hell. Lieutenant Morrison. They ran. They pushed their horses to the breaking point, a desperate, heart-pounding race through the scorching desert heat. Jake's knowledge of the terrain was their only advantage. He led them through a bewildering landscape of canyons and mesas, trying to shake the relentless pursuit. "There!" Ayana shouted over the thunder of hooves, pointing to a narrow, jagged slit cutting into the side of a massive mesa. "I know this place. The Canyon of Whispering Winds." They plunged into the shadowy maze of rock, the temperature dropping instantly. The canyon twisted and turned, a labyrinth of stone designed to confuse and trap the unwary. They lost the patrol in its depths, the sounds of their pursuit fading, swallowed by the rocks. But Jake knew Morrison. The man was like a bloodhound. He had their scent. He wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever. He'd been hunting Jake for 10 years. This had become personal. That night, they found shelter in a hidden cave, tucked high up on a cliff face, their exhausted horses tethered in a small grove of cottonwoods below. The fire was small, carefully hidden. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and the ghosts of their past. As the moon rose, casting eerie shadows on the cave walls, Ayana came to him. She moved silently in the darkness, and when her hand touched his arm, he flinched. Her touch was different this time. There was no seduction in it. It was urgent, desperate. When she kissed him, it didn't taste of freedom. It tasted of goodbye. "Make love to me," she whispered against his lips, her voice thick with a sorrow that mirrored his own. "Please, as if it's the last time." "It won't be," he said, trying to sound convincing, but the words felt like a lie. "Promise me something," she said, her fingers tracing the old scars on his chest, each one a testament to a battle lost. "If we don't make it to Mexico, if they catch us, promise me you'll remember this, that for 3 days you weren't just a ghost running from your past. You were running towards something." He couldn't speak. He could only pull her closer, his answer lost in a kiss that was raw with desperation and a terrible, aching tenderness. They made love with a frantic intensity, two souls clinging to each other on the edge of an abyss, knowing their time was borrowed, measured in heartbeats. He tried to memorize everything about her, the way she moved beneath him, the small sounds she made in the back of her throat, the way she whispered Apache words against his skin like sacred blessings. He was trying to burn the memory of her into his soul, a final defiant act against the darkness that was closing in around them. Because as he held her, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Morrison wasn't just following them, he was hurting them, driving them toward a trap. On the third morning, they reached the Rio Grande. It wasn't the majestic river of songs and stories. It was a muddy, sullen ribbon of water, cutting a lazy path through the desert. But on the far side lay Mexico, freedom, safety, a new life. It was so close he could almost taste it. But the taste was of ashes. Because Morrison was waiting, the trap was sprung. The lieutenant stepped out from behind a thicket of cottonwood trees. His Colt revolver held steady, aimed directly at Jake's heart. Behind him, a full squad of cavalrymen emerged from the brush, their carbines leveled. They were trapped, caught between the river and a dozen rifles. "End of the line, Thornton," Morrison sneered, his face alight with triumphant hatred. 10 years I've been hunting you. Fitting it ends here." Jake's hand twitched, moving instinctively toward his own gun, but Morrison just laughed and cocked the hammer of his revolver. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. "I wouldn't. Not with the lady so close. Wouldn't want her to get caught in the crossfire. Again." Ayana's horse danced nervously, sensing the tension. Her dark eyes met Jake's, and in them he saw no fear, only a grim, weary acceptance. She had known this moment was coming. She had been preparing for it all along. "Let her go, Morrison," Jake said, his voice a low growl. "Your fight is with me." "Oh, my fight is with both of you," the lieutenant chuckled. "She's a fugitive Apache carrying treasonous documents. You're a deserter and a traitor. Both of you are worth a handsome bounty to the right people. And I," he patted his chest, "am the right people." That's when Jake knew. This wasn't about an arrest. Morrison wasn't taking them back. He was going to kill them right here, claim they resisted, and take the treaty for himself. He would be a hero. And just when the situation seemed utterly hopeless, a new sound filled the air. Not the cocking of a hammer, but the low rhythmic beat of unshod hooves on dry earth. A war party crested the hill behind them. Iron Wolf sat at their head, his face a granite mask of implacable fury. At his side were not 20, but 50 warriors. The chief had kept his word. He'd come, supposedly to surrender, but he hadn't come alone, and he hadn't come to talk. "Gentlemen," Iron Wolf's voice boomed across the riverbank, calm and caring, "I believe we have something to discuss. The standoff was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Three armed groups, a triangle of death under the blazing Arizona sun. Morrison's cavalry, trapped between the river and the Apaches. Iron Wolf's warriors, poised on the ridge like avenging angels. And Jake and Ayanna, caught in the dead center, the prize and the fuse. Each side waited, rifles raised, fingers on triggers, for someone else to blink first. Jake stood between worlds. The army that had cast him out, the woman who had somehow redeemed him, and the Apache chief who had offered him a twisted chance at honor. He felt the weight of it all, the centuries of blood and betrayal that had led to this single explosive moment on a muddy riverbank. In the end, it was Ayanna who broke the stalemate. With a sharp cry that was half Apache war cry, half scream of defiance, she spurred her horse forward, not away from the fight, but straight into the Rio Grande. The muddy water splashed high around her as her horse plunged into the current. "Enough!" she called back, her voice ringing with a power Jake had never heard before. "I choose my own fate." Morrison, his face contorted in rage, swung his rifle toward her, tracking her movement. He was going to shoot her in the back, but Jake was faster. His Colt was in his hand before he even thought about it. The gun barked once, a single sharp crack that echoed across the water. Morrison spun around, a look of pure shock on his face, a small, dark hole appearing in his chest. He staggered a step, his gun falling from his hand, and then collapsed into the dust. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then all hell broke loose. The cavalrymen, seeing their leader fall, raised their weapons. But Iron Wolf's warriors were already moving, pouring down the hill like a tidal wave of vengeance, their rifles spitting fire in death. "Hold!" Iron Wolf's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. He rode slowly down into the river, a figure of absolute authority, stopping beside his wife's horse in the middle of the current. The fighting faltered, the two sides momentarily stunned by the chief's audacity. For a long moment, husband and wife looked at each other across the gulf of their choices, their sacrifices. The air crackled with everything they couldn't say. Then Iron Wolf reached out and touched her cheek, a gesture of profound tenderness and farewell. "Be free, Ayanna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Live the life you choose. Build the world we dreamed of." Tears streamed down Ayanna's face, but she didn't make a sound. She touched his hand once, a final, gentle contact, then turned her horse and urged it forward, toward the far bank, toward Mexico. "Go, Thornton!" Iron Wolf yelled, turning his horse to face the cavalry. "The debt from Apache Pass is paid." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He spurred his mount into the churning water following Ayanna. Behind him, the battle erupted anew, a furious crescendo of gunfire and war cries as the cavalry and the Apache finally settled their old scores in blood and dust. But Jake didn't look back. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't running away from something. He was riding towards it. They crossed into Mexico as the sun bled across the western mountains, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red. On the far bank, safe at last, Ayanna stopped her horse. She looked back across the river at the country that had shaped her, scarred her, and ultimately set her free. The sounds of the battle were fading, distant pops on the evening breeze. "Do you regret it?" Jake asked, pulling up beside her. His voice was hoarse. She turned to him, and in her smile he saw everything he had been searching for his entire life, without even knowing it. Acceptance, hope, the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. "I regret nothing," she said. But then her expression changed. The relief was replaced by the same steely determination he'd seen in the cave. This wasn't over. "This is not the end, Jake," she said, her voice low and intense. "This is the beginning." He looked at her, confused. "The beginning of what?" "We're free." She shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "No one is free while our people are in chains. The treaty was never the final goal. It was a key, a way to get me here." She gestured to the vast, empty desert stretching before them. "My mother's people are not just a family. They are a force. They have land, allies, and a deep hatred for the men who run both our countries. With them, we will build a new community, a haven in the mountains, a place for the displaced, Apache, Mexican, even Americans like you who have been cast out." We will not be a nation that begs for peace. We will be a nation that commands it. Jake stared at her, stunned. She wasn't just a chief's wife. She wasn't just a messenger. She was a leader, a revolutionary. The passion, the desperation, it had all been real, but it had been for something so much larger than he could have ever imagined. He had been a part of her plan all along, but not as a pawn, as a partner. She saw the question in his eyes. The night in your cabin, that was not a lie, she said softly, her gaze unwavering. I chose you, Jake Thornton, not just to be my guide, but to be my ally, to stand with me, if you will. The choice hung in the air between them. He could ride away, disappear into Mexico, truly a ghost at last. Or he could stay. He could fight alongside this incredible, dangerous woman. He could help build the impossible world she dreamed of. He could finally stop running from his past and start building a future. He looked back one last time at the river, at the smoke rising in the twilight sky. Then he turned to her, and for the first time in a decade, Jake Thornton truly smiled. Where do we start? He asked. 6 months later, a letter found its way to a thriving, hidden settlement nestled high in the Sierra Madre Mountains. It told of how Lieutenant Morrison's crimes had been exposed by a personal journal Jake had found on his body, a journal detailing years of corruption and murder, including the truth of the Apache Pass massacre. It spoke of a military tribunal that shook the army to its core, and it said that Chief Iron Wolf had not died in the battle at the river. He had been captured, yes, but his honorable stand, combined with the evidence from Morrison's journal, had turned him from a renegade into a symbol. He was still a prisoner at Fort Marion, but he had become a powerful voice for his people, negotiating for better treatment, for a future. His sacrifice had not been in vain. Jake lowered the letter, looking out from the porch of the small house he had built with his own two hands. He watched Ayana as she taught a group of Apache and Mexican children, their laughter echoing in the clear mountain air. They were building their new world, piece by piece. It was hard and it was dangerous, but it was real, and it was his. He had found his redemption, not in a bottle or in solitude, but in the arms of a woman who saw the man he could be, and in a cause worthy of the soldier he once was. If this story of desert passion and frontier redemption stirred something in you, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the untamed West. And drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with fellow lovers of these classic Western stories.